Aloha, aloha kako. Greetings to all of you. My name is Gerald Hirata, and I'm the president of the Kauai Soto Zen Temple here in Hanapepe, Kauai. Today, I would like to take you on a journey, and it's a journey that tells a story of this temple. In essence, however, it is a story of people, their families, and their lives. It's a typical immigrant story about the American experience. While many European immigrants were arriving at the door of New York Harbor, on Ellis Island at the base of the Statue of Liberty, another migration was taking place on the West Coast, in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle. However, in order to get to the West Coast, Honolulu Harbor was the port of entry and the gateway to the Americas, and also a gateway to a dream and a better life. We are on the beach on an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a chain of islands that is the most isolated landmass in the world, the Hawaiian Islands, and it could be reached by nations of Polynesia who had the skills and the knowledge to navigate these vast oceans. The native Hawaiians had long established a rich and thriving culture 1,000 years before the first Westerners arrived here. And the Hawaiians were very accepting of different people, different cultures, and allowing it to flourish here in these islands. When sugar became an important industry in the late 1800s, the Hawaiians were accepting of different people and allowed other cultures to flourish here in these islands. So when the sugar became an important industry in the second half of the 1800s, the Hawaiian kingdom looked for a cheap source of labor and searched on the far side of the Pacific, even the Caribbean islands and the islands in the Atlantic Ocean. First, there were the Chinese, the Portuguese from the islands of Azores and Madeiras in the Atlantic, the Japanese, the Filipinos, the Puerto Ricans, the Okinawans, and the Koreans. There were small groups also of Spanish, Russians, and Germans, and much later from Samoa, Tonga, and Micronesia. So this is a story about the brave people that dreamed of a better life, to rise above the conditions in their homeland, and most of all, to seek a better life in a place called Hawaii. So let's begin a journey to where it all began. Once upon a time, long ago, so goes the refrain. The year was June 1899. There was a sugar mill at Elieli called Elieli Plantation. It was owned by August Dreyer, about 1,100 acres of land, a sugar mill, an electric railway, implements, and livestock. The McBride Estate in Kalaheo, whose founder, Duncan McBride, came from Scotland to manage a cattle enterprise in Wailua, Kauai. In 1860, he purchased property in Wahiawa and built his home called Brideswood and raised 6 children. After Duncan's death, 2 of his sons, Alexander and Walter, remained on Kauai, while his wife and other son, Douglas, moved to California. The McBride Estate was organized with his 6 children as stockholders. The Koloa Agricultural Company, not to be confused with the Koloa Sugar Company. The agricultural company had 2,600 acres of land, part of it growing sugar, and the grinding mill used by Koloa Sugar, and a thriving business enterprise. These 3 entities combined to form McBride Sugar Company. Many villages called camps were built to house the imported plantation laborers and grant them access to the sugar fields that stretched from Hanapepe to Koloa, starting at Camp 1, Wahiawa Bay, Camp 2, Camp 3, and all the way up to Camp 18 at Kukuila Harbor. Today, as you are driving from Ili'ili to Kalaheo on the McBride Road, a bridge spans the Wahiawa Gulch. If you look Mauka towards the mountains today, you will see some Quonset huts in the distance. This area was once Camp 2 and Camp 3 Wahiawa. There were approximately 100 dwellings shown on that previous map. When the camps were still alive, it was little that marked the entry to this dusty little McBride enclave. In the summer and fall of 1899, 500 Japanese immigrants were assigned to McBride and settled at Wahiawa Camps 2 and 3 by the year's end. This was a sizable immigrant group, mostly single men, but 20% of that group came with their wives and a few children. One of the workers who signed a contract with McBride Sugar was Haruji Kinoshita on July 17, 1899. 6 months later, Ichisuke Hirata came to Wahiawa. It was a day after Christmas on December 25 that Ichisuke signed his contract. More workers followed in the winter of 1900. This set a stage of what was to follow. Life was difficult for the camp's Japanese residents. Many who came found work on the sugar plantation difficult. The hard work of harvesting the cane, cutting the stalks, loading it onto the carts, hauling it to the mill, weeding the fields was tedious work, one that many women did. Workers were thirsty under the hot Hawaiian sun, but kept the fields irrigated as a priority. Wages were low, hours were long, working 6 days a week. Workers supplemented their income in whatever ways they could, such as catching fish and selling it, or raising hogs or chickens to put more food on the table. However, it wasn't just the Japanese community that was making an adjustment to plantation life. In other nearby camps, there were Filipinos, Portuguese, Spanish, Puerto Ricans, Koreans, and Chinese. Lunch, or kaukau time, brought the workers of different ethnic groups together. It was a good time to socialize, like sitting down at a picnic and sharing your food. At payday, no matter where you worked or where you lived, you stood in line to collect your hard-earned wages. And it did not matter who was standing in front of you or behind you. And everyone went to the company store to buy items on credit, become even more indebted to a paternalistic program that kept the workers happy, which meant building schools, churches, recreational facilities, stores, dispensaries, and hospitals. Things changed in March 1903 when the Reverend Ryo-un Kan left Hiroshima and sought out the Japanese community at Waipahu on the island of Oahu. He soon discovered that there was a larger group of Japanese who had settled at Wahiawa at McBride Sugar Company, so he immediately left for Kauai, where the residents of Camp 2 and Camp 3 welcomed him with open arms. Having a Buddhist minister affirmed the community's Japanese identity and made living in a foreign land a bit more manageable. Reverend Khan started preaching in a home, then used the community hall. and later in 1904 built a combination church and language school. The school and the church brought normalcy back to a struggling immigrant community. Reverend Khan initiated a change in people's outlook of settling in a new place by promoting Japanese cultural traditions, catering to the community's spiritual needs, providing funerary services, and caring for the physical and mental health while strengthening the moral and social fabric of the camp's residents. Here we see cultural events such as Obon, which were celebrated, and women could dress in their traditional wear as was done in their homeland. Even theatrical plays like kabuki were done to entertain. Men's organizations and clubs were formed, and various kinds of church gatherings and functions were also held. Finally, in 1918, a main temple was finally built, replacing the one that was housed in the Japanese school building. It was a significant event where the entire community could partake in the celebration rituals. It also marked a milestone, symbolizing the growth of the community, affirming its status as an important religious and spiritual site. It must have been a festive and auspicious occasion, with the pageantry, the band playing, the crowd marching, knowing that this was a significant step of the community's growth. This was a positive step that ensured that good things were to follow, and that dreams could be achieved. With a new temple, Zen-shuji could now reflect on its status and importance that 15 years ago it was still the first Zen temple to be established in the islands and the first in the Americas. Within a few years, the minister's residence and visitors' quarters were constructed, fulfilling a dream and a promise of better things to come. As the Waihiwa community grew, so did McBride Sugar Company. A few years after 1899, a new sugar mill was built in New Mill, or called New Milla, displacing the Ili plantation mill operation. As the sugar industry grew, technology and ideas were imported from other sugar-producing nations, such as this mill, designed from Cuba, that McBride incorporated by 1918. As the Hawaiian sugar industry progressed, equipment modernization continued to advance. In fact, the industry became the most highly mechanized in the world. This also meant high production costs and higher wages for the average worker. After World War II, this iconic stationary crane was a familiar sight to many McBride employees for the next 25 years until it was finally torn down in 1970. 4 years later, the mill operations moved to Koloa, using Grove Farm Sugar Mill, replacing what had become McBride's old technology. Paralleling McBride Sugar Company's growth, the Waihiwa community also thrived for many decades. The Japanese school became one of the largest on the island in the 1930s. The Young Men's Buddhist Association helped to raise money to purchase a bell from Japan in 1934. A new bell tower was built, so another big celebration took place at the opening ceremony. With the bell tower addition, it seemed like the temple's complex was now complete. Although the original Japanese schooling was rebuilt, the 3-classroom building on the left was still functional, with declining number of students. The large social hall in the center of the photo was a busy activity events center. The large monkey pod tree provided a canopy of shade. Further to the right, not in view of the photo, were extensions to the parsonage that housed classes for doll making and other crafts for women. The Zenshuji temple shined in all of its glory as the temple was the center of all social, cultural, and religious activities for the camp's Japanese American community. There were gatherings at the social hall for school functions, wedding parties, holidays, and other kinds of celebrations, Friday night movies, and church functions as seen in this 1950-era photo. Waihawa was a community full of life. The Lava Rock Temple Gate and the Bell Tower were favorite playground spots for children. The area from the gate to the temple was an open playground used as a basketball court or a softball pitch or the festival grounds for the Bon Dance Festival. By the 1970s, although the luster was gone, the temple's beauty was still evident, framed by the large monkey pod tree that enhanced the ambience. Life was good. It was a country life of hearts and feelings, where the drudgery of camp life and the deteriorating conditions of the homes were transparent to the residents because life in Waihawa was what people made of it. By then, the future of the sugar industry was not promising. Residents moved into neighboring Eli, where McBride Sugar Company set aside lands for its employees. Still, the plantation looked after its families of workers. And in a community like Waihawa, people made the best of an impoverished situation. Japanese values said to endure, work hard, persevere, and do for the sake of the children. The Buddhist values also shaped the character of the camp's Japanese community. It helped bridge the gap between generations, allowing residents to understand the values of our parents and grandparents and stress the cult of the family. Even during the difficult period of World War II, where the Japanese in Hawaii were not interned, life continued under martial law. The Japanese language schools were closed, as were the Buddhist temples. However, volunteer groups like the Kiawe Corps helped ease the racial tension in the community and supported the war effort, collaborating with the Red Cross, the U.S. Army, and the U.S. government. After the war, things returned to normal. The first Bon Dance was held in 1946 on Kauai. America's influence became global, economically, politically, culturally, and technologically. It was a prosperous time with the growth of the American middle class, and Hawaii was no exception. It was a camp full of life, with Friday night movies at the community hall, numerous church functions like bazaars and Bon dances and Christmas parties, camp picnics, and Little League baseball. Buddhism stressed passivity, doing one's job well, almost breeding fatalism and complacency. However, it made the rough times of labor unrest and sugar strikes easier to bear. The church and its teachings shaped attitudes and ways of interacting with people. That is, to be humble, low-key, and have consideration when dealing with others. We were taught that other people's reactions were important, so it determined how we behave. The idea of building a new temple was started 15 years before the construction actually began. Hanapepe Town was the most logical site as it served all of the plantation communities on the west side of the island. The move to Hanapepe, Kauai's biggest little town, ushered a new era of visibility for the temple that was once nestled in a tiny plantation village hidden among the sugar cane fields. The temple sponsored an annual summer festival at the Ele shopping center to raise funds. Enough money was raised to secure a lease along the highway from the state of Hawaii, starting the planning and the construction, which began in October 1975. Members of the congregation who were plantation laborers were joined by other McBride employees and their many friends who possessed needed skills in drafting, carpentry, painting, surveying. There were also time out for lunch, and so that the other skilled workers, plumbing, electrical wiring, could finish the task. After 2.5 years, the temple was near completion. The estimated construction cost was $105,000. The new temple was finally completed and dedicated in 1978 to coincide with the 75th anniversary of the celebration of the Sotoshu temples in Hawaii. It was another milestone in Zenshuji's rich history, again since it was the first Sotoshu temple in Hawaii. A grand celebration was held on November 4 and 5, 1978. In Hanapepe, the congregation grew and cultural tradition and arts flourished. In the summer Bon season, traditional Japanese food were showcased at the annual Bon Festival. The Zenshuji women created the flying saucer, which became the most popular festival food item, known all over the islands, becoming a statewide symbol of Kauai's uniqueness. In 1985, the state of Hawaii celebrated the 100th anniversary of the arrival of the Japanese contract laborers to the islands, called Kanyaku Imin. It was a contract between the government of Japan and the Hawaiian Kingdom. From the period 1885 to 1924, over 200,000 Japanese immigrants came to Hawaii, the largest number from any racial group to work on the sugar plantations. A large reunion was held for former Wahiawa Camp 2 and 3 residents in July 1985, drawing over 700 people statewide and from many parts of California and the U.S. The sugar company was ready to demolish all of the old camps that dotted the McBride landscape. The event, Wahiawa 85, was sanctioned by the state of Hawaii to commemorate this important immigration anniversary. A final tribute and goodbye was held at the original temple site before it was razed by bulldozers. Hundreds gathered at Wahiawa Camp 3 for the final service to pay a final tribute and to remember and to say goodbye to their beloved hometown. Attending the event were Hawaii's leaders, Senator Daniel Inouye, Governor George Ariyoshi, and Mayor Tony Kunimura. Senator Spark Matsunaga was unable to attend the event and sent his regrets. This reunion gathering was aired on CBS Morning News, a 90-second segment with Maria Shriver. Also headlined a page in the Los Angeles Times with a lengthy article by correspondent Charles Hillinger on the front page of the View section of the Times. And of course, the Garden Island devoted several pages to cover this event. This reunion was a most heartwarming event, a gathering unlike anything imagined, where one attendee described it as a happy funeral, another, the best reunion I have ever attended. Many of Hawaii's prominent Japanese Americans were descendants of plantation immigrant workers. 2 of them have McBride Sugar Company plantation roots. Senator Dan Inouye's grandparents came to work at McBride in the fall of 1899. Asakichi and Moyo Inouye settled at Wahiawa Camp 3 with Dan's father, Hyotaro, who was then 4 years old. The family later moved to Honolulu when Hyotaro was 8 years old in a section called Mo'iliili. Hyotaro married Kame Imanaga, and Dan was born in 1924, the eldest of 4 children. Inoue attended McKinley High School and graduated in 1942 and became a decorated war veteran who lost his right arm in combat service in the U.S. Army's 442 Regimental Combat Team, which was the most decorated military unit in U.S. history. After the war, Dan received his law degree and was part of the first congressional delegation when Hawaii became a state in 1959. He served in Congress as the second longest member of the U.S. Senate with a distinguished tenure of more than 49 years. As President pro tempore, third in line of presidential succession, Dan was the highest-ranking public official of Asian descent in U.S. history. Senator Spark Matsunaga was born in Kukuila, McBride Sugar Plantation Camp 18 in 1916. His parents, King Goro and Chioro, moved a few miles west to Hanapepe Town when Masayuki was 4 years old. He was tagged with the nickname Sparky when he was 8 years old after a comic book character named Spark Plug. Sparky attended Elieli Elementary School and Kauai High School and raised money by selling subscriptions to the Garden Island newspaper in order to attend the University of Hawaii. He graduated in June 1941 and joined the U.S. Army, commissioned as a second lieutenant. He served in the 100 Battalion and later the 442 Combat Unit and was wounded twice in battle. He was a Bronze Medal recipient. He then attended Harvard Law School on the GI Bill, and returning to Hawaii, he began an illustrious career as a territorial legislator and later served in Congress for 26 years, 13 in the House and 13 in the Senate. In Congress, Matsunaga was a peace advocate. He advocated for the Department of Peace, a cabinet position. He promoted resolving global conflicts through peaceful resolution without resorting to war. He wanted a place where young men and women could learn the strategies of peace, unlike the strategies of war as was taught in the military academies. The results of Matsunaga's efforts culminated in congressional legislation in 1984 that established the U.S. Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C., near the Lincoln Memorial. It is a peace academy where graduate students and interns could learn about conflict resolutions, producing soldiers of peace. As a result of his congressional work, there is a Spark M. Matsunaga Institute of Peace at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Each year on September 21st, Kauai Soto Zen Temple and the Storybook Theater of Hawaii honors and celebrates the legacy of our Kauai native son and Hanapepe boy, in conjunction with the United Nations International Day of Peace, a truly global event. Those who have paved the way for the rest of us, that is, those who gained national prominence as public servants, may have their images cast in bronze, as we see here at the Children's International Peace Garden at the Storybook Theater in Hanapepe. It is the statue of Spark Matsunaga and his granddaughter. However, many others have paved the way and served the community and temple admirably. Like Mrs. Shizuko Kato, who was born in Hiroshima in 1906 and came to Hawaii as a picture bride when she was 16 years old, never meeting the man she was about to marry. Her family worked as clam diggers in Japan off the shores of the famous Miyajima Island, home of the Itsukushima Shrine. When she settled with her husband in Wahiawa Camp 3, she worked in the cane fields of McBride Sugar Company for 45 years. A tedious job of hoeing the weeds, covering the cane seedlings with soil so it could root in the ground. They were covered and dressed from head to toe to shelter themselves from the hot Hawaiian sun. Mrs. Kato sang the Hole Hole Bushi, toiling in the sun, singing to dispel the monotony of work. These were not folk songs she learned growing up as a child. It was a genre of songs like the blues, soulful, expressing the sorrows and the hardships of plantation life. An elderly woman who sang the songs called it painful song, while others referred to it as the Buddha Head Blues. Whatever it was called, it was honest, spontaneous, something created here in Hawaii, nurtured here in the islands, and sang only in the cane fields of Hawaii, mostly by women. Others like Mrs. Haruko Sakai was born and raised in Camp 10, known as Lawai Stables, where there were horses and mules to help with the field work for planting, irrigation, weeding, and harvesting. When Haruko married, she and her husband Tatsuo moved to Wahiawa Camp 3, raised a family of 4, and cared for her in-laws, typical for the women of that time. She recently passed in November of 2020 at the age of 98, where she was the temple's matriarch for a long, long time, the last of her generation. She had worked 40 years in the sugar fields of McBride. Haruko is pictured here, front row center, from the previous photo of the women field workers. On the 110th anniversary of the temple in 2003, she was honored for being a devoted, loyal, and longtime member of the temple, with 3 and 4 generations of family members still a part of the church today. Mamoru Funai took a different path. He left the Wahiawa community after high school to study at the Honolulu Academy of Arts, then the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, and the Cleveland Institute of Art, and the William Parsons College of New Jersey. He worked as a professional illustrator and freelanced in New York and New Jersey. Mamoru never returned to Kauai, but recalled the days of his youth, growing up in Wahiawa Camp and playing under the monkey pod tree. He recently wrote a children's book about his childhood days and illustrated its pages with his beautiful art and titled it The Monkey Pod Tree. Today in Hanapepe, Mr. Funai would be pleased to know that on the temple grounds there is a monkey pod tree. It is not the one that he played under or climbed as a child, but the tree itself and a nearby temple is sure to bring back his old memories. Another invaluable asset to the temple was Hisao Omi. He lived on the east side of the island in the town of Lihue. He worked at the mill at Lihue Sugar Plantation and was a man of many talents and interests. He loved to fish, farm, and tend to his garden. He grew anthuriums and he made his own cement pots for them. When the temple was being built in Hanapepe, the question to decide was what kind of wall would mark the temple's property and separate it from the main highway. Who would be tasked with the difficult job of building this wall that would span more than 50 yards? The answer? Hisao Omi. He sculptured a wall that would become an iconic symbol of the temple, a non-intrusive one with circular and triangular forms that made a see-through mosaic patterns with the grassy lawn as the backdrop. The wall did not impede the view from the highway, but defined and encased the beautiful temple grounds. If you look closely, embedded in the rough, natural concrete were shards of coral and seashells collected from the various beaches all over the island. So, it is people like Hisao Omi, Mamoru Funai, Haruko Sakai, and Shizuko Kato that brought color and life to the temple. Their character and spirit defined the temple itself, and today we stand on their shoulders. We remember and we will continue their legacy. Today, the temple attracts a whole new generation of people interested in mindfulness, meditation, and wellness. People searching to find peace within themselves, to foster their own personal growth, physically, mentally, and spiritually. We live in one of the most beautiful spots on this globe, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. We are of the islands, Kama'aina, people of this land, of these islands, of Hawaii, Hawaiians all. And we are lucky to live here in Hawaii and a part of the USA, blessed to be in this dynamic American culture. Our mission is for you to become a better person, finding the peace in yourself, and also to enrich your lives, to make the ordinary extraordinary. We honor the legacy of a McBride Hanapepe hometown boy. From Hanapepe, we are sending this message. Peace and aloha from Kauai. Every September 21st. There is a 30-foot tall statue reaching out to everyone, and we can only attain peace if it is done with mercy and compassion. We also promote wellness physically, mentally, spiritually. We also offer taiko classes for adults. Disciplined recreation for adults learning an art form. We are a Zen Buddhist temple. We are here to share Zen philosophy, Zen arts, and Zen culture. We also keep our folk culture and traditions alive. On New Year's Eve, we start the year right by ringing the bell 108 times. In the summer, we celebrate Obon with a colorful festival. We have the largest, most colorful celebration on the island. We are the original home of the most popular festival food item, the flying saucers, found only on Kauai, which makes us unique. We want you to experience our heritage and history. As we are planning to move forward, starting new chapters, we hope that you enjoyed our stories. This is our history of how we have evolved and will continue to do so. From eating out of a bento box in Japan to eating a plate lunch here in Hawaii. Mahalo for allowing us into your lives. We thank you very much with gratitude. And don't forget to visit us when you have a chance. Aloha kako, ahui ho, until we meet again, and take care of yourselves. E malama pono. This is Gerald Hirata saying, arigato nui nui loa, mahalo de gozaimasu.